Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Larry Wentz in for Matt Breen.
And I'm Jessica Bowman. As we continue our top story coverage here tonight on News 4 at 6, Sioux City Community School District officials faced off against former Superintendent Dr. Paul Gosman in court today. Gosman is suing school board officials, alleging they violated open meeting laws and met in secret to file a complaint against him.
KTV's Matt Hoffman was in the courtroom where school district officials argued they followed both the law and their normal process. He joins us live now in studio. Matt?
Yeah, thanks, Larry. There were some tense moments with Gosman's lawyer cutting off former school board president Dan Greenwell, but things largely remained amicable. We also got a rare look inside normally secret and closed school board meetings because the trial items discussed behind closed doors became public today. Gosman's team argued Greenwell had filed 2 complaints with the Iowa Board of Educational Examiners without the consent of the school board. Both of those complaints were improperly filed, but there was a 3rd complaint that was eventually authorized by the board. Greenwell says Gosman attempted to, quote, bribe 2 school board members elect to vote for a different board presidential candidate at a meeting in Des Moines. Gosman testified he did recommend board members other than Greenwell, but he said that was just his opinion, not a bribe.
Attempt to bribe school board members down in Des Moines with his offer that if they voted for Pearl Alacon Flory as president, he would allow them to make changes in district operations.
Greenwell testified the board followed the law and its own policies. He says allegations against Gosman were discussed at a regularly scheduled performance review in January of 2022. He says Gosman was aware of the meeting but did not attend it all at the direction of the board president. The board voted to file the complaint about 11 months later, that's November of 2022, after Gosman left for a job in Nebraska. Gosman says he wasn't invited, while the board argues they have no need to include him.
I did not offer anything to them in exchange for that. I did give that opinion, which it is my opinion that I have that right to do, and so I did.
The most recent BOEE complaint is still in progress. According to testimony, the agency found probable cause that Gosman may have violated regulations, but no final decision has been rendered.
Matt, it seems like the hearing was very technical. What's the bottom line here?
Yeah, so 2 things. For that second meeting, the lawyers argued over whether the correct part of Iowa law was cited to close the session. The board cited part of the law relating to confidential records, but Gosman's attorney argued there were no confidential documents to discuss because the complaint wasn't authorized until after that meeting. And for that first meeting, the judge will have to decide if the district truly met to discuss that quarterly review or if Gosman is correct that they were really discussing filing a complaint.
And Matt, I do want to add one question. Since these meetings are normally not public but held behind closed doors, was any information disclosed during testimony today?
Yeah, actually, both sides had objected to our cameras filming evidence at the trial, but the media coordinator for area, that's Woody Gottberg, successfully argued we should be allowed to shoot video, and of course, that's how we were able to show you those images.
All right, Matt Hoffman live in studio tonight. Thank you for that continuing coverage update.